Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to this penultimate Birmingham Tech Week session, this keynote session, startup stories, lessons from entrepreneurial journeys. We've got a great panel of entrepreneurs, three entrepreneurs that are really leading the way when it comes to tech startups in Birmingham and across the West Midlands. And of course, you can join the conversation on LinkedIn and Twitter with the hashtag BTW2020 and hashtag Birmingham Tech Week. And of course, the week is being run in association with three great partners: Tech Nation, the West Midlands Growth Company, and the Department for International Trade. And I just want to say thank you for all the work they do, both in the West Midlands and across the entire UK, especially in the West Midlands, though, kind of helping tech organisations export their products and services, but also encouraging inward investment into the region as well. And of course, the week wouldn't be possible without our wonderful sponsors, and a big shout out to NatWest, who are our lead and headline sponsor this year, for all the work they do, especially around their entrepreneurial accelerator as well, helping a lot of tech entrepreneurs on their journey. And of course, our other sponsors, Copper, Culture Group, BJSS, SideTrade, and BMET. And of course, a big thank you to our 2020 partners as well. A shout out to a couple: Bruntwood SciTech, great hub, and I know a lot of organisations that we're going to, well, a lot of the panelists actually we're going to hear from today have had connections with Bruntwood SciTech and based from there as well, and also kind of Make UK and Storycoms as well for all the Make UK for the stuff they do around kind of apprenticeships and helping the next generation get into tech, and Storycoms for all the work they do around PR and comms with tech firms. And now I'm going to hand over to your host for today. It's Jay Ashcroft, and he is the Chief Marketing Officer for Birmingham Tech Week and Birmingham Tech. And so it's my delight to hand over to Jay, who's going to introduce you to the panelists.
Thanks, Giannis. And thanks for everyone for joining and watching on YouTube. So I'm pleased to announce in our Startup Story section, we're joined by AMON from Hyvespace, we've got Jen from Fluence, and we've got Sam from Wonder. So to give you a brief overview of what we're going to do on this call, on this session, we're going to have sort of 10 minutes with each of the founders, and they'll get to tell us a little bit about their story, how they started the company, any challenges that they've been through. That'll take us through to sort of half an hour. And then we'll have sort of 15-20 minutes where it's a Q&A, where everyone on the call can ask questions, whether it's the whole panel, we can draw those out, or whether you've got specific questions for our specific panelists. To kick us off, what I'd ask is that if you want to introduce yourself, use the chat function on the bottom of the Zoom screen, intro yourself, where you're from, what you do, just a few lines, and maybe your LinkedIn. And then as we're going along, if you've got any questions, if you can please use the Q&A section at the bottom. I say that because sometimes if you put the questions in the chat, it's quite easy to miss them and they just go down the thread. So make sure you're popping those in the Q&A. And then when we get to the section, I'll read some out, and we'll get the panelists involved answering your questions. So without much further ado, I'm going to go to our first panelist, which is Jen from Fluence. And rather than do a disservice to any of the panelists, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we'll have a sort of 10-minute discussion with them about their business and the challenges they've had. So over to you, Jen, if you want to give us an intro to yourself and what you do at Fluence.
Sure. So I'm Jen, co-founder and CEO of Fluence. I'm responsible for our operations, investment, and sales, but in reality, anything that needs doing and whatever stage we're at. Fluence is currently a team of 8. Big shout out to the team. I think we're all watching. And we are hoping to grow quite a lot from March next year.
So tell us a bit about what Fluence does. So what market you and what technology have you developed?
Yeah, so Fluence is never the easiest thing to explain what we do, but we facilitate the transparent and repeatable decision-making process in settings that require complex interpretation of documents. And we've done that by combining natural language processing, forensic linguistics, and machine learning in order to mimic and augment subtle decision logic of skilled professionals. We've tested the Fluence engine in an array of different sectors, and I think in this instance it's easier if I give some examples. For example, we've helped an educational institution with their quality management of written exam papers. A bit of an interesting one this year given what happened. We've helped a press regulator with mapping out their arbitration cases so that they could understand which cases in the past might be most useful for their future. And actually most recently, and I'm actually talking from Switzerland at the moment, we're helping pharmaceutical companies with their freedom to operate searches, so the IP space, and also their M&A due diligence process, again, sort of over with the IP space.
Excellent.
So yeah, we've built a quite ubiquitous technology. We can really work in a lot of different sectors, so sector agnostic. And it's really about helping people understand the decision logic of complex documentation that they have.
So I guess this is one of the cool things about AI, and also one of the challenging things, right? Which leads to a good question. So how do you go from having this idea of these are sorts of things you want to solve and change in the world through technology? How do you bridge that gap between starting and actually developing like the foundations of the AI? How did that work for you?
So it's been a journey. We actually spun out of another company. So my co-founder and I actually started with a literacy teaching consultancy. And we really were focused, so we've always been focused on language, always focused on the insights that language could provide. But we actually we built a sort of frequency analysis tool that would really help young offenders get back into education, training, and employment. So we were really passionate, still are really passionate about that piece. But this is where serendipity sort of aligns. We realized that the engine we built, or the technology we were building, can actually be used for far more than just sort of getting people from not literate to literate. Actually, it can provide all sorts of insights into really niche sectors and very different, varying sectors. And it just so happens that my dad is a machine learning guru, and we actually started to weave some of our forensic linguistic ability with some of the more artificial intelligence sort of algorithms, and started developing our own. And we really found that actually we could start to determine what good looks like, what good quality looks like, in a way that a human might never be able to explain. And certainly where we got most excited about our space is where you have 100 skilled professionals all trying to look at documentation and interpret it in the same way and trying to come up with the same decisions. Well, that's almost impossible because we're all human. So we kind of built this really cool technology to really help with that quality assurance process.
Excellent. So yeah, I feel that you had that early pivot almost out of a previous company, and
yeah,
leaning into what you know, like the language assessment side, but then going for a bigger opportunity.
Yeah, it became, once we started using machine learning, it was more appropriate that we spun off into a new company. And it really allowed us to go and get investment to really run with the idea that we had.
Excellent. So if it's okay, would you be happy to touch on like how you sort of got your first investment and how you built that runway so that you could, because one of the challenges with AI is it has quite a long time to revenue. So you got that deep incubation period, right? And then one day it appears, and then everyone's got to have it. So how are you able to fund yourselves through that initial sort of incubation period?
So we were very lucky in that because we're a spin-out company, we were able to develop a lot of the technology whilst we're still on another company's payroll. So that's step number one, and a bit of a different step. Then we've been really fortunate with our seed investment, that because we had really good use cases in the educational setting, and we're really known in that field, and we've worked with the Ministry of Justice, there's real legs for developing the technology for their other applications that they had. So we got seed investment fairly easily, but then what you're touching on is that our Series A has been really quite different. So whereas lots of companies have the benefit of being able to develop an MVP and then showing a little bit of revenue, really for an AI company, you need lots of data, and you almost need data more than you need the money, but of course we all have bills, so you need the money too. And it's all about really finding people who buy into your idea. So we had a few projects and a few paid projects. We don't do badly, but if you're trying to look at a valuation proposition based on revenue, Fluence isn't the right company for that investor. So finding an investor particularly in the West Midlands and the UK actually as a whole, it's a bit more of a challenge. And we did have a false start on our Series A. And so we've actually had 2 false starts on our Series A so far. The first one was a steep learning curve. We had a lead investor that we really liked, got on really well, and we basically had this huge task of going out to find 2 to 3 other investors that were going to syndicate that specifically follow the round, not lead. Now, unfortunately, our lead investor was then no longer able to lead, and this is where one of those things that you look back on, we'd obviously been wooing all these investors that didn't want to lead, so we were left in a position where we'd done a lot of work and we weren't really going to get this. It wasn't right anymore. We were no longer speaking to the right people. Luckily for us, we were on a really big client and the money was no longer a big thing. And we were able to say, look, we can afford to put this on ice for a year. And then I alluded to a false start number 2, and I'm afraid that is COVID. And again, we are really, really lucky. We had the foresight to do something called an advanced share agreement round. And we're really lucky that we've been able to build an incredible amount of runway that will hopefully get us through this pandemic. But yeah, raising investment is a whole job in itself.
Definitely. So yeah, I can imagine COVID's disrupted many a tech business positively and negatively.
Yeah.
This period as the world sort of readjusts. I think one of the interesting things you mentioned there was, so you pivoted from your sort of first market, and you're now looking at, you know, a new market. So could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so we were about to assess 500,000 English GCSEs back in February. So we had PO numbers coming through, we were sorting everything out. And I don't know if everyone remembers what happened in April, but of course all the GCSEs got cancelled. We were also talking to several VCs at the time who were really excited that we were getting this great momentum in our first market, which is the education sort of awarding organization sector. And of course, with COVID, they all started to focus on their portfolio companies rather than investing in new companies. We had this crazy moment where we're like, well, is this it? Is that the end? I mean, we've got money in the bank, but we really wanted to grow. We didn't just want to sustain. We've always been really ambitious with what we want to achieve. And then we just had to have a good hard look. And what we really wanted was a sector that had money. So pharmaceuticals seemed quite good. But what we really, really needed is openly available data. And the IP space is fantastic for that. I mean, you've got open data sets with so much insight, but actually really painful for people to trawl through. And we've been able to pre-load our software before going to some of these pharmaceutical companies. And we're providing insight and value from the first meeting. So that's been a real game changer for us.
Excellent. That's fantastic. So I'm going to leave it there for the moment, Jen. So if anyone has any questions for Jen, start popping them in the chat, not in the chat, sorry, in the Q&A section, and then we'll read those out later. And on that, I'm going to segue over to AMON. So nice to have you with us, AMON. So if you could give us an intro to your role at Hive and what your company does.
So yes, thank you, Jay. My name's AMON, the founder and CEO of Hive, a brand advocacy platform that helps brands turn their happy customers into empowered advocates who actually spread positive word of mouth. And this actually helps to grow their business and drive innovation.
Excellent. So tell us a bit about your founding story. So how did you start Hive, and you know, what prompted you to do that? Yeah,
so actually I'll try and explain actually what Hive is more, just as Jen did. So over the last 10 years, actually, there's been a steady decline of trust in brands and their advertising. And there's also been a shift of consumers' behaviors from traditional advertising to more communities that actually have shared values, shared beliefs, and shared purpose. So as you can imagine, it can be quite difficult for brands to actually reach out to new audiences and new customers. So what we've done at Hive is we've created a platform that would actually enable those brands to look inward to their happy customers and identify who their advocates are. And then we provide the tools for them to collaborate with their advocates and actually work alongside them to increase the number of referrals, to increase the number of reviews, to actually get their actual customers to share their content with their networks, and above that, actually get their customers to create content that would actually resonate with their customers, right? And it goes beyond that, actually. They get to actually improve their products by generating new ideas, validating new ideas. And also, we measure, the one thing that we do very well is we track every engagement, every advocate, to actually understand the return on investment on each and every one advocate, right? And then we also measure the success of their advocacy campaign to get to understand how they can improve and personalize the relationship with the advocates. And then above that, we actually help the brands to reward their advocates or recognize the effort and the time that they put in to promote their brands, you know. So when the brands do this, actually, as you can imagine, they actually build a meaningful relationship with their customers. That's built on trust and loyalty. So when you think about it, or actually at Hive, we talk about, it's all about real customers telling real stories, right? So if you think about it, if Jay, you love a product, you know, you're more likely to actually tell your friends about the product, and the product, because they trust you, because your friends trust you, they're more likely to buy the products. You know, a good example is Tesla. You know, they've created a brilliant product, Tesla electric car, and their customers actually are out there creating videos, sharing it on social media. That increases their awareness and reputation, and people actually trust those brands. And above all, when they do create new models, those customers are highly likely to upsell and buy the new models. So it's almost like a virtual cycle that keeps on giving.
Definitely. So yeah, I started my business career working at Apple. So
yeah,
I was a bit spoiled, thinking, well, if you make a great product, right, everyone just advocates for your brands, not understanding that there's this whole other cultural piece and this relationship piece that becomes almost cult-like, right? So the pandemic period must have been interesting for you, especially because sort of traditional retail and sort of going and meeting salespeople and in-person sales, that's all really been shut down, right? And the world's really transitioning to digital. So have you seen a big change in the marketplace, or have you seen like traditional companies becoming much more interested in sort of online digital sales?
Yeah, so one of the things I was talking to actually an accounting agency, they were talking about how do we sell without selling? And it's all about connecting. You can't actually reach out to new customers to try and sell, we've got this brilliant product to try and sell more, right? So they actually looked inwards to actually create new content that would actually help them through this period. And that's actually advocacy. When you think about every business, we should be out there to support our customers to succeed. And products like ours, it actually helps brands to help their customers. And above that, their customers, because it's almost like an altruistic thing. It's about community spirit, and it's getting them to actually go and spread that news to others. So when we do come off this pandemic, you know what will happen? People will remember that business. And that's actually how, if you think about this period, it's about caring. It's about going back to your shared purpose. It's going back to actually why you exist, right? And when businesses come out of this, people will remember, oh, I like X, Y, and Z because they took care of me when we were not actually buying from them.
Excellent. Yeah, for sure. So be interested to know a little bit more about the journey that Hive have been on. So have you had any sort of pivots or any like happy accidents, or from when you started, was this always the goal in mind, or have you changed along the road?
Yeah, so I worked in the customer experience space for the last 10 years. And when I quit my job for the first time, we went into almost like creating marketing technology to help brands improve their customer experience. Yeah. And what we realized actually, agency world is quite turbulent. It's not predictable. And what we did is we thought, let's go back to what we're good at, which is creating software. And that's where Hive was born, really. If you think about Apple, it's all about NPS, you know. NPS is such a big thing. How likely are you to recommend my business to your family and friends, right? And we saw a missed opportunity where most of these brands were actually not taking that opportunity to get their customers to recommend that business, right? And we actually thought, wow, that's the missed opportunity. We're going to go for it. And that's why we created Hive. So, and now actually we're at a place where we're very lucky. We've got a product. we've got 2 customers, and now it's actually a case of trying to like build on that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So yeah, I guess a good lesson there from really segmenting. I think it's one of the traps that many early stage startups fall into, right? You have this big idea that you want to change the world with, and you think like, well, 5-10 years down the line, this is where we're going to be at. But those first 18-24 months, it's sort of what are you going to be the best at? And actually just doubling down and focusing on that. Yeah. So is there any, I guess, have there been any sort of opportunities where you've been sort of come along, but you've been able to sort of be resilient and say, well, actually, that's not our core competency, or we're okay letting that one go by because you had the bigger goal in mind?
Yeah, so we're very early on in our journey, and we actually had the opportunity to work with National Express in their innovation program, and they really helped us to shape the product. So we had a very good goal. We had a customer with a clear problem, and we actually got to talk to their customers and their teams to get to understand what their challenges were. So we haven't actually shifted from where we are. We're still carrying on. And actually now we've decided to focus on the financial sector, financial services. Because what we've realized, actually talking to wealth management funds and some of it actually fintech companies, they're looking to help their customers succeed. And that's where we've decided to focus on.
Excellent. Yeah. That's fantastic. So I'm going to leave it there for the moment, AMON, but that's a great overview. And I'm going to pass over to Sam from Wonder. So first of all, Sam, thanks for joining, and give us a brief intro on sort of your role at Wonder and what Wonder does.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks, Jay, for the opportunity to talk with everyone. Yeah, my name's Sam Reeder. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Wonder. I work heavily on community growth, partnerships, sales, and investment. Essentially, Wonder is a new social learning network, and we're connecting people around environmental and social impact topics at present, where people have got passions or they're progressing towards career aspirations. Typically, groups and communities use Facebook pages or LinkedIn groups or even WhatsApp groups, but they struggle to connect on those channels, and they struggle to share knowledge in a productive fashion. And because communities are such a powerful driving force for businesses or organizations, or even, as you can see in the world now, with people motivating either missions or activism within the world, communities are really powerful. But we're building a platform that's dedicated towards bringing those people together with shared values, shared interests, so they can learn and accelerate that action.
Right. So tell us a little bit about, was that always the goal at Wonder, or have you sort of pivoted along that journey as well? Because it's a sort of common theme, right, in the startup story?
Yeah, definitely. No, it's an interesting one. I think our vision has always remained fairly sturdy in terms of why we started, which was very much born from the idea of the discrepancies that we saw with learning and education as a whole, where people are presented with the idea that it's a case of the grades and the examination rather than necessarily the why that we're learning and those things that really drive our passions. But the actual product itself and the first area where we're gaining traction, that kind of came out of nowhere, really. We wanted to put something out there which had our values at the heart of it, which were about, as I say, learning and following your passions and ambitions. But we really had to experiment a lot and fail a lot to see which communities were most in need of the product we were building. And then we really wanted to always build a brand that stood for something. And so when we saw the environmental and social impact community gathering a lot of traction around what we were building, it really felt like a no-brainer to us to focus and build that network out first. And we've been really enjoying the fruits of that labor and also the impact that we can see.
Excellent. So one of the unique things about Wonder, and I find this especially in the Birmingham ecosystem, is that you guys are primarily a B2C platform, right? That anyone can sign up to. So it's out there right now. You can go on, download the app, sign up. There's no barriers to using the platform. So how do you sort of funded that and develop that runway? Because obviously one of the challenges with B2C software is often, everyone uses it for free, and then there's a really lengthy process before you monetize or before you eventually sell. Many big B2C platforms never actually create revenue. They just get bought by someone bigger. So it's a sort of very different business model than I think the more traditional revenue generating startups we see in Birmingham.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's something we've come to realise more and more as well around Birmingham, and we're realising that connecting with people and gaining that knowledge is so pivotal to ensuring we can build out the business model that we're looking for, especially because, as you say, we are a non-transactional type of business, which doesn't lean on the revenue at the moment. We're far more focused on behaviour and how can we shape a product that supports all the good things that we want to see in the world and within society. And that's really our kind of core focus at the moment. It's not also to create addictive experiences, which I think some social platforms have inadvertently ended up creating because they're so keen on dwell time. So what we've found is a business model within all of that, whereby we actually align ourselves with organizations. Doesn't have to be businesses, can be people who are looking for donations, non-profits, or also people who are just bringing people together in their local community. And what we tend to find are people are looking for premium access to whether it's content or whether to people, because ultimately people want to accelerate their action. So the first part of what we're doing is building a technology that supports the behavior first and foremost, but it's very naturally aligned to a business model which is already in the real world, where people are paying for courses, or they're paying for access to people, or they're paying for products or marketplaces. And if we can provide that infrastructure, and we're seeing that evidence at the moment where we're almost the IT layer and the support of their community, we're actually supporting these businesses with taking on more revenue and creating new revenue streams for themselves. So I think to your earlier question about pivoting as well, that's been a kind of change and almost a happy circumstance that we've discovered by putting the product out there and just building relationships and getting to know the community leaders as much as the community members themselves.
Excellent. And then would you say you've had any pivots or real big challenges along the way where you've had to sort of go back to the drawing board a little bit?
Yeah, I think I've read a piece of, there's a book called Blitzscaling by Reid Hoffman, and he talks about having Marines as part of your startup journey, which lead to the army, which lead to the police later on, where you govern what you've created. And I think, although I've got friends in the Marines and I can never associate with what they go through, but the idea is that people who have got resilience and are willing to go through the front door get a bit bloody along the way. There's been a lot of mistakes along the way, and I think with anyone who's familiar with the startup scene, speed in order to experience those issues or experience the positives. But if you have got issues coming up, get into them quickly, feel the pain very fast, run into the spike. Normally what I've found is with those issues, they take you down a path towards a much better place. So it's looking at risk without bringing the fearful connotation. Look at risk as it's an experiment, and what you'll learn from it is going to be gold dust. So we try to build values now into the business whereby we're running quick, and there's actually not a mistake that can be made as long as it's towards our values. It's more a case of we want to go quick into the failure if there is going to be a failure, because that's going to help us learn quicker. Maybe a key example of that is whereby we actually thought we were building a product for people, so people should be the first element of what we're doing. So we put people at the very front of our network, but actually because we're trying to connect strangers sometimes because of the deficiencies they have in Facebook and WhatsApp, we suddenly realized that actually we've overlooked a huge human behavior element here, which is that strangers need to get to know each other first of all and build and understand their values and understand each other before they actually do any of the behavior. So we're constantly iterating, constantly experimenting and putting things out there to be better next time.
Excellent. Thank you for that overview. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start pulling out some of the questions and then posing them to the panel. So we've got some questions up for everyone and some going for specific panelists. So everyone out there watching, if you've got a question for a panelist or just a generalized question, pop it in and we'll try and get it answered for you. So the first one I'm going to do is from Diana. So Diana's asked, how do you know when you are ready to quit your job and start your own company? So we'll pass that over to Sam. What was your experience of that? And we'll go through all the panelists actually on this one, because it's a good startup question.
Yeah, no, it is a great question. And a lot of startup life is like chewing glass, actually. So it's really tough. And I think for me, it was about really contemplating, did I care about what we were trying to create as a solution? But then also importantly, we worked for a bit of time and my co-founder has been pivotal, Simon Jones. I actually hooked up with Simon to share the problem and we both cared. And from that perspective, we then worked on arranging finance and arranging what's this going to look like for us personally before we left our jobs. And we lent a lot on our own personal connections and our personal experiences in our own industries to shape out how we wanted to stay resilient. As I say, there's a lot of mistakes that will be made along the way. So being in a place which I care about, going for a mission that I really care about, and having trust with someone who I can go on the journey with was really important for me before making the jump.
Excellent. So if we bring in Jen on this one, so maybe a little bit different way to do this because Fluence was spun out of Rapid English. So how did you start your first company, which was a cyber company, was it? Is that correct?
Yeah, I had an encryption business straight out of university, which failed, I think, after, I don't think it made its 12-month birthday, to be honest. It failed rather fast. I ran out of money really quick. And then I went into recruitment, and then actually I got loads of training, which I really needed. I made a bunch of money, which I also really needed. And I became the rookie salesperson of the year, which was a good ego boost for me at the time after having had the sort of failed business under my belt, which I think, yeah, was hard to accept. And then actually for me, I guess the question might be more, I decided to quit that really well-paying job where I was doing really well to join someone else's startup, not even my own. And I had to change something at that stage. I had money. I actually did like what I did at the time. I was working with people. Recruitment was exciting, but it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. So I think I had to quit because it was never going to be enough for me. And I didn't, the next startup I joined, I worked at for 12 months, and then I did that literacy consultancy and then spun off. So my career has been, pivots all the way through. And I think you end up knowing yourself, is what I'm doing today enough? Can it ever be enough? And if the answer is no, then what are you waiting for?
Excellent question, Jen. Excellent answer, Jen. Over to AMON. What was your experience?
Yeah, so before this, actually, a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I actually had a previous startup, and I was pretty much doing 2 jobs at the same time. So, and I was sleeping more or less 4 hours a day, and I was doing 8 hours my day job, another 8 hours when I got back home. And I did that for 2 years, and it almost broke me. And I remember telling myself, the next time I actually come up with a new idea, or when I decided to go for a new venture, you have to focus 100% in the new job. I think this idea of doing something else, sometimes it doesn't give you that kind of focus that you need, right? So when I quit my job this time around, I was actually with Yanis, and that idea of understanding that there's no salary coming in, and we have actually bootstrapped ourselves up to this point, right? And you have to, as Sam just said, you have to be passionate about what you're going for and really believe in it. Because the days where you're not going to get a salary going in, you have to pay rent. I didn't have much savings when I quit my job. So I've had to just really believe in myself and really believe that we'll actually get some revenue and then plow that in and extend the runway. And it's a pain that you have to go through. So that kind of grit, that kind of passion and perseverance, and understanding that you need to know your why before you actually decide to quit your job.
Excellent. I remember reading, so I started my first startup probably 7 years ago. It was NedTech, and I was in a sort of well-paying sales role, regional sales manager at basically Apple Education. Really unhappy with it, even though I had a good career ahead of me. And I remember reading the Tim Ferriss book, and he had a line in it where he said about overcoming this fear to start a business, and it was, if you start a business and it all goes wrong and it doesn't work, on a scale of 1 to 10, how catastrophic is it to get back to where you started from? And I think reading that made me realize that, in a sales job, once you've worked in sales, you can kind of everyone always wants salespeople. So it's very easy to get back to that place. And that really like unfroze me at that time and enabled me and my co-founder in that point in our lives to take the jump and leave our salaried jobs and go on that roller coaster as a startup. So yeah, I definitely think Diana, like if you're thinking about it, then assess like what do you want to do, and you know, if you did it, how hard, if it all went horribly wrong, how hard would it be to get back to where you are at the moment. And usually it's not actually that difficult most times than not, and the journey you have is definitely worth it. I'd always say someone should start a company if you're thinking about it. So pull out another question. So we've got one specifically for Jen from Sanjay. So Sanjay said he's enjoyed hearing about Fluence. Are you thinking about going international? If so, where? Or is it too early for your business?
Ooh, very timely question. I'm actually sat in Switzerland at the moment. I handed in my paperwork last week to open up our first Swiss branch. So we're hoping to we're hoping to be able to announce a really cool partnership next March. So we're doing this all in prep. And then beyond that, we're looking, there's maybe an opportunity in Hong Kong as well. And what I'd say about going international is it's what's giving me my energy right now, actually getting to move country, do something a little bit different. Sometimes a change is as good as a rest. And after the COVID and the cancelled exams, I needed something. And yeah, I think we've just pursued other opportunities, and it's just so happened that we're just really leaning into it. So we're going really bold. So over here in Switzerland for 12 months now.
Excellent. Very jealous, Jen, of all the mountains and the street waffles. It was something I enjoy when I was in the office with you. Go over to Sam, because I know Sam has users internationally. So tell us about how you think about your sort of marketing and user acquisition, Sam, and whether you think of yourselves as a Birmingham-based company or a global-based company.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We definitely see ourselves as Birmingham in terms of building the team, but more so now we're looking to grow outside of that, especially with COVID. It's proven we can do that. But in terms of our marketing, we actually see ourselves as going after the attitude and the psychology of people, which, because we're focused on the environment and social impact, it tends to be that there's a huge amount of knowledge and insight that can be found from internationally. The challenge is always going to be language and culture for us in terms of trying to scale at that rate. But I think in terms of where we are today, learning from companies either in Canada through to Pakistan, all across Europe as well, there's a real shared aspiration and attitude that we've mostly focused on. I think we will start to build out the platform and the network more so regionally in the coming months. But at the moment, with regards to how we're building traction, we're actually building relationships from all over the world at the moment.
Excellent. That's great. And Eamon, what about yourselves at Hive?
Yeah, for us, it's very much the UK at the moment. I'm just focusing on there are quite a lot of companies across different sectors. And in the future, we'll be looking at creating a more global company where we could have offices in Australia, America, but that's more long term. Excellent.
That's great. Got a question coming from Arshad. So Jen, proven popular on the webinar. What has been the biggest challenge when you've been trying to build a deep AI company?
Ooh, there's a few. Data, I'd say. There's a lot of data in the world. No denying it. There's more data now than there was 2 minutes ago. Getting structured data and getting it from organizations has been a really tough challenge. So open data sets have absolutely been our friend. When there are open data sets, it's how you use them, the ethical side of using data as well. Yeah, and then finding funding without being able to boast those nice revenue or even users. We don't have very many customers, but the ones we have are very cool. But to get to them on board, it's been a journey in itself.
Excellent. I wonder if data or funding have been a challenge for you, Sam, with a bit of a
data and funding.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think we're never creating anything from scratch. There's obviously a map in front of you that's almost covered in fog. And so it goes back to kind of the mistakes question you asked earlier. I think the only way of unraveling the fog and then retrospectively trying to map that data back is just by, you know, creating, exploring and validating as much as possible. The data part has always been a big missing piece for us in the first 2 years it was, especially with our strategy was to outsource. But then building the team internally, headed up by our CTO, we've really been able to get a much tighter control on that, and it's just jigsaw pieces now, adding it as we go. But it's always something new that we're missing, and I think that just goes back to starting a startup is difficult, and you just have to be resilient and plug the gaps as they appear. There will be many of them.
Excellent. So for AMON, I'll phrase it a little bit differently, because I guess all companies want brand advocates, right? And they all want that referral business. So it's almost like everyone wants that, but they're not getting there. So I guess what's the challenge for yourselves, or what you've seen in helping them get along that journey?
Yeah, so I think what most people don't understand is don't realize is that they currently actually do bits and bobs of advocacy, and the main thing, it's just working to deliver an exceptional customer experience for your customers, right? One of the things that we did some piece of research last year to try and understand what the drivers are with Warwick Business School, trying to understand what the drivers are to try and create advocates from your customers, you know, trying to drive advocacy. And we found about 8 things, and one of them was making it easy for you to do business with your customers, right? And getting to understand the different customer personalities and the relationships that you actually have with those customers. And also falling back to what your brand values are. So when you do those things right and engage your employees, because your employees are your biggest advocates, and getting them onboarded in terms of going out there to build better relationships, that's how you start creating advocates for your business. Yeah.
Excellent, that's great. Sam Cole, I can see you've raised your hand, but if you can type in the chat or the Q&A, then we can answer your question if you've got one. In the meantime, I'll pose one of my pre-curated questions that I wrote in case we didn't get any through. But so at some stage of the company, it was yourself and your co-founder, and sort of today you've now got employees or teammates around you. So one of the big challenges for most people in transitioning from sort of idea into business is how you build that team around you. So if you could share your experience about sort of your first hires, or your first, if you brought people on equity or as co-owners, like what was that journey like for you? We'll stick with you, Eamon, if that's okay. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, so more recently, actually, managed to get 4 people into the business just as interns. And what I did, I took a very different approach where I actually just gave them responsibility and held them accountable to what they were doing. But with I had a previous founder, and you know, you have to have your values aligned, or aligned to what you're trying to do in the future. So it's always a relationship thing, and you just make sure that you build the right relationships as you proceed on.
Excellent, good answer. How about you, Jen? Your first hires, your first team members.
Right, so it started off, we were again a little bit lucky, spin out. So Dave and I had worked together before. He also happens to be my husband, so really
that helps.
Yeah, it really helps. And who was our first hire? So it's funny, we actually got interns on board initially because we just wanted to flesh out the idea. And then we got our technical lead on board, and he was pivotal to the team. And then we're really lucky. We managed to offer some of the interns, 2 of them, full-time jobs. And then we were able to bring some people from the old company over as well. So we were in a fortunate position. We kind of knew people already. We'd already worked together, and people could already see what we were developing, and it was exciting. So we had a good mix of sort of new, old, and it gelled really well. We're a really close-knit team now, which is really nice. And in terms of equity and things, we're all salaried, and we all have been salaried. As co-founders, there have been bouts of no salary, but then I think that's just the joys of being a founder. And then we've got an EMI share option scheme. So it's really important to us that everyone that's on board can sort of really benefit when Fluence benefits, all in it together.
Excellent. Over to you, Sam.
Yeah, when it's going back now for me, when I first brought on the first team member after me and Sai, but for me, it always came down to the relationship that we could have. And I think the longer time we got to know that individual, the more we challenge, also how could we handle conflict together? Because you're bringing someone into something which you work day and night on. And so when building out that team, I think it always came down to the values, and if you're rowing in a direction, if someone's against that vision or against going off at vectors, you're going to have a hard time of going somewhere fast. And again, you can't get through the problems quickly enough if you're always fighting. So someone who could bring in conflict to shape a better end outcome was always going to be a big part of it. And as we've grown the team, we've always looked for people who can make this their own. So it's not this autocratic culture, but more of a team and a family at this size, at least, where we can share the vision together. And I think that's been a big part of just building out the values as to how we gel.
Excellent. Great one. I've got another question that's coming from Caroline Keenan. So do any of the panel have or have had mentors, officially or unofficially, along the journey? So if we stay with you, Sam.
Yeah, I do actually. I have a number from a number of different angles, and it's actually one of the things I would recommend before making the jump. So going back to Diana's question, I think surrounding myself with more and more knowledge has always been a very powerful thing for me, and knowing that I don't have all the answers. So again, it comes down to team as well, which is find people with the same values, people you can work with, but be totally open-minded to know that you don't know everything, and that's what a mentor's there for. So I've had a number from finance through to business relationships, through to product development, internal culture. Just surround myself with people who've been there and done it, and that's been really powerful for me.
Excellent. How about yourself, Eamon?
Yeah, same as what Sam just mentioned. I've been very lucky to work with some incredible people who've done amazing things in their careers, and it's always just tapping into them for advice. And one of the things I found, so we're part of Barclays Ecolabs with Sam, and we always have conversations and we inspire each other. And sometimes I talk to Sam and he actually advises me on things, and we advise each other. So you just need to be very open to new perspectives. So and be willing to listen and take every opportunity that's out there. Any advice that you get, you never know who's actually gonna. One of the interns that I have has really shown, and he's very just willing to give new ideas, and you learn so much from that. So mentors come from they come from all sorts as well.
For sure. Definitely I always learn a bunch of stuff off when I'm working with 18, 19-year-olds who sort of grown up without, they've never not had technology in their hands. So
yeah,
if I want some digital marketing done.
I found that actually the young generation, the young people actually have great ideas, and being open to be challenged as well on some of your assumptions sometimes is quite good.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then how about you, Jen? How have mentors or external advice shaped the journey?
Yeah, we had a mentor early on who's now our chairman. So it went from being very unofficial to more official. And that's been really, really useful. Just someone, and we're really honest, really direct with each other. And, if we're having a bad time, we're not playing, we're not pretending, he is an investor as well. So there was always a bit of a challenge of how honest and vulnerable could we really be without sort of scaring him as well. But that's been really, really great. And I think that's one of the things to surround yourself with, people who are going to not just nod yes when they mean no. You need honest feedback from people. And I think you also need people to hold you to account. So it's really easy to have an idea run away with you a little bit, or to have ideas and passion for doing something, but then you need people to hold you to account. And I certainly need people to hold me to account, and I'm having to learn that I need to hold other people to account in the nicest way, but just making sure that we actually do cross the line as well. So that's been a bit of a journey.
Yeah, it's almost the entrepreneur's dilemma, right? Where if you're too much of a realist, you wouldn't start a business. So you have to be such a big picture thinker. But the difficulty with that is that sometimes the things right in front of you can just sort of ignore them, because 2 years down the line you're going to be this huge company. I mean, I was certainly guilty of that when I was running my own companies. We've got a question come in. So Sam, I can see your question. We'll close off on that one because it's sort of playing another question I had, so we will answer it. A question from Anonymous. So do mentors serve their purpose for different points of the journey? If so, how do you end the relationship positively? So I guess that's a really good question on, when is the point that that external expertise is sort of, you need to move on and you've gone through a different cycle. So perhaps Jen, it might be good to start with from your perspective.
Yeah, I think a good mentor will recognize themselves when they're no longer able to help you on your path, or you sort of end up having different ideas, or someone takes on a different job and becomes too busy. So there's a multitude of reasons why you might no longer work as closely with a mentor. If I feel like that question might be leading to they're working with someone and maybe don't want to be anymore, and how do you sort of politely end it without burning bridges? I think it really is just being quite transparent about what you want to focus on and saying this is the experience you need right now. And as founders, time is not something you should just give away willy-nilly. You really need to focus your time because it is so precious. So I think just saying, look, I need 3 months to focus on something else, I need this, that can be a nice little stepping stone if you don't want to do something more directly.
They've just written lol, so I think you've hit it on the head where they may be trying to exit an existing relationship. I can add a little bit on that if it may help them, because I'm a mentor for a number of businesses. But yeah, I know my strengths and specializations, and I'm quite open and honest with the companies. I think it only serves, it's in the company's best interest if you're starting to go beyond your expertise because you can't provide value. And when you phrase it that way, that, perhaps you're at the end of the journey and it's time to look for somebody else that can help them with the next step, it's always quite a positive way where you can exit that relationship. But, it's in the best interest of the company and there's no sort of bad blood there, because you're being honest in a very polite way. But back to that sort of original question. So how about yourselves, AMON? So have you ever had any mentors where they've sort of overstayed their welcome, or have you had to sort of think about that at all?
I haven't really, but I like what Jen just said. I completely agree with her. That level of transparency, as she's mentioned, there's no time to waste with a lot of things, and some mentors actually can't give you the time that you need. I've been very lucky that actually some of my mentors chase me sometimes when I go quiet, and that's quite positive, and it's letting them hold you to account and you being absolutely 100% responsible and accountable to yourself and to them, because they're giving them their precious time to help you out. So but transparency, if you do find that you've come to an end of that kind of relationship, it's just being honest and maintaining that relationship. Never end a relationship on a bad note. So that would be my advice.
Sage advice for mentors and beyond there, I think. Anything from Sam? Would you like to add anything on that one?
Maybe just something I've learned along the way with dealing with situations like that. I think, like Jen and Eamon have said, honesty and transparency, but also I think if they're a good mentor, or even if there's someone you can actually have a conversation with, get your logic out and try to remove the emotion from it and present the understanding that you and the feelings you have. And if they're on the other end and a reasonable individual, they should be able to take your logic and understand the decisions you're making, and then just run into that spike, because everything's good on the other side of that.
Excellent, that's great advice. So we'll close the Q&A there, and then we'll go to each of the panelists now for the final thought, and then we'll close the session. So we'll use Sam Cole's question because it was a play on a question I was going to close out with anyway. But Sam's asked, so if you could give another founder the benefit of your hindsight, what one thing would you do differently? So if we start with you, Sam.
I think mine comes off the back of maybe Jen's actual experience of how you got started, Jen, which my feelings for myself personally at least would have been to have mapped out the industry I wanted to get into and the target audience, and tried to find a role or a mentor or someone I could work with initially to maybe spend a lot of time in that industry, in the same space, or supporting people who were on the journey that I was about to enter into. I think there was a bit of a baptism of fire for me at the beginning, and that could have been kind of navigated better at the beginning if I'd have had that experience. So I think looking for people who are already on the journey, how can you support, how can you add value, and then learning a ton from that before getting into your own. Excellent. That would have been my biggest one.
How about you, Eamon?
I guess for me, one of the things I'll do differently, I think, is being a business that we're bootstrapping ourselves. It's really easy to fall into short-term kind of thinking and not thinking about the long term, and you end up making decisions that maybe actually doesn't help you in the long term actually. And one of the things I would say, it's about just taking that slow, steady approach to things, and just trusting yourself, and having that kind of self-confidence that you will actually see yourself through any challenges that you're facing. So it's every mountain. I talk about magical bridges appearing for the last 3 years, because we've always got to that cliff and suddenly just you get another lifeline. I'm pretty sure I'm on my 8th one right now, but I'm pretty sure I've got another 50 to come. So yeah, so that's my advice. Slow, steady, and just trust and have confidence in yourself.
Excellent. That's a good one. I like that magical bridge one. I've been there a few times myself. How about you, Jen?
I think for me specifically, if I look back to our first Series A sort of go, there's a lot of work involved. And we got really excited that we were approached and sort of offered this like lead investor. So of course we had to look no further, but that's what I would say, look further. Not because I'd still get an investment round from them today. So it's not no bad blood in that sense, but give yourself options when it comes to investment. There's nothing better than having 2 or 3 people fighting over you. And it's a lot more work short term, but it's a lot more work having to go at around, again, 6 to 12 months later. So that's what I would change.
Excellent, that's good advice. Well, I'd like to thank all the panelists. So we're going to close out there so everyone can head over to the next talk. But big thank you to Jen, Eamon and Sam for joining us and being so candid with their own experiences and expertise. And then thank you to everyone out there who's joined the chat and who's watched on YouTube, and everyone who's answered questions. I hope you've enjoyed the session. So thanks for joining, and I guess feel free to connect with Jen, Eamon and Sam through LinkedIn if you have any sort of burning questions that you want to ask them that we didn't get a chance to cover. Thanks everyone, and hope you enjoyed the next session. Bye.
See you later.
Thanks, bye.
Cheers all. Bye-bye.